So today's reflection came in pieces and over time. I'd like to share with you a little bit of that process. As a relatively new member of UUCSH, one of the first activities that I actually felt comfortable taking part in was the worship committee. Kind of a been there, done that thing, so I was comfortable with it. And part of participating in the worship committee is I had the great opportunity to complete a workshop with Melanie Griffith and several other members of the worship committee in the congregation on creating lay-led services. We're going to be doing a mini repeat of that in the new year when we get a chance, so that other people who are interested in creating services can also participate in that process. But as we were planning out different services, I had heard people say on several occasions that one of the most memorable lay-led services of the past was a talk that was given by Peter Hunch a while back. I don't know if Peter's here today, I guess not. And the talk was entitled Faith of an Atheist. As an atheist myself and the former co-leader of an atheist agnostic humanist group in Plainfield, I was naturally curious, and I agreed with the others that the committee should probably ask Peter to repeat this talk, perhaps maybe with a fresh new service designed around it. I've done a bunch of those services, and I felt comfortable building another one. As it turned out, when we asked him, Peter was not interested in repeating his talk. And after getting a copy of his original speech, I thought I might have an inkling of why this was. It's not a negative thing, but I did understand him, I think. As I mentioned, I've given and attended several of these services and given the same talk myself. And every atheist talk that I'd heard, including Peter's excellent speech, tends to center around three main points. First, the person professes their stance as an atheist, and sometimes they talk a little bit about their starting point, whether as a UU or elsewhere, and their evolution, philosophically, religiously. Second, they usually spend a considerable amount of time defending atheism against society's disapproval or against the historical bias against it or the incessant attacks of the religious majority. That's usually a piece of it. And third, if you give this speech and you're in the UU world, as Peter was, you end by thanking your lucky stars that you're in the UU world, because thanking God is frowned upon if you're an atheist, and highlighting how accepted we feel here. And all of that is well and good. If you're not lucky enough to be in the UU world, then part 3 of the talk is usually going on the offensive, counterattacking the moral hypocrisy of religion or arguing the negative side. There's no shortage of anti-theists in the discussions these days, and often, like myself, they're armed up and charged up by the words of Christopher Hitchens and Dawkins and Dennett and other of the new atheists, some of whom are anti-theists, some of whom are atheists. There's a spectrum. Well, let's start off right away by establishing one thing. I'm not one of those atheists, and I will not be giving that speech. I've done it, been there. I've already spent more than enough time defending my stance against those who feel that I should believe what they believe. Not doing that. I've already shared my spiritual journey in several forums, including our world religions class, most recently, when one member pointed out, for an atheist, you're awfully spiritual. I wasn't sure how to take that, but I'm going to own it as a compliment. For today, I have a different goal. Rather than defending atheism or rejoicing at the tolerance of Unitarian Universalism, or celebrating my atheist spirituality, or attacking religion's weaknesses, my intent is to turn that speech on its head. Today, I come to you to speak not as an atheist, but as a secularist. Peter's talk was entitled The Faith of an Atheist. Mine is The Soul of Secularism. Yeah, I hoped I get at least one giggle. I think, to draw a line in the sand today between what I believe, atheism, and what I rationally know that the world actually needs from the secular viewpoint. My contention today is that Unitarian Universalism, and by extension, all of society, needs something that secularism has. They need it desperately in this brave new world of 2025, and perhaps more than ever in history. It's not only political polarization between conservatives and progressives that seems to be growing, but also the divide between the religious and the non-religious. More and more people, over 40% in the last Pew Research poll, identify themselves as no religious affiliation, a designation that is often shortened to nuns. As a former Roman Catholic, I find that hysterically ironic. Most atheists have to stumble over it, as I just did. But nonetheless, nun signifies no affiliation or no specific religious belief. At the same time, there's been a rise in Christian nationalism, Christian fundamentalism, and the political involvement of religion, which has arisen, I think, largely as a backlash against the progressive movements of the 60s and 70s. There's kind of a generational delay in the pendulum swinging. And this backlash has served to reduce much of our political discourse to the point of culture wars. We fought culture wars over all kinds of things. What to teach in school, what your doctor is allowed to do, what laws should be passed, how money should be spent. It just literally never ends. But I should tell you it's not new, and I think you know this. I mentioned earlier Christian nationalism, which is based on the contention that we are and always have been a Christian nation, hence the term. Or, in the more affirmative form, let's say, Christian nationalism claims that we should be, and that it is in fact the duty of certain Christians to make us a Christian nation. That is the more interesting form, I think. However, available evidence shows that while the vast majority of the people in the original United States were Christians of one sort or another, it was the persecution of these people, both in Europe and here in the colonies, that motivated them to found their nation not on the divine right of any king, but rather on the just power derived from the consent of the governed. I say again, it was their persecution that drove them to found a nation that would be different. Religious disbelief has a long history in the United States, dating back to the writings of Thomas Jefferson, Thomas Paine, and Robert Ingersoll, as well as the free thinkers of the 19th century. So there has always been two sides to this coin in this conversation in this country. James Madison, who wrote much of the Constitution, also wrote, "Every new and successful example of a perfect separation between ecclesiastical and civil matters is of importance. I have no doubt that every new example will succeed, as every past one has done, in showing that religion and government will both exist in greater purity the less that they're mixed together." Thomas Jefferson wrote in his letter to the Baptists of Danbury, which some of you have probably heard of, "Believing with you that religion is a matter which lies solely between a man and his God, that he owes account to none other for his faith or his worship, that the legitimate powers of government reach actions only and not opinions. I contemplate with reverence that act of the whole American people which declared that their legislature should, quote, make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, thus building a wall of separation between church and state." That letter is not the origin of the phrase wall of separation between church and state, but it is absolutely the best example and most widely shared example. It might also interest you to note, as Christopher Hitchens often pointed out in his talks, that the reason that the Baptists of Danbury were appealing to Jefferson to enshrine a law on religious freedom in their state constitution was that they, the Baptists of Danbury, feared state-sponsored persecution by the Congregationalists of Danbury. Jefferson's response was essentially translated into the current vernacular, aight. We'll take care of it. More recently, the 20th century secular movement was able to disperse secular thought more effectively through the formation of organizations whose mission it is to protect the separation of church and state. In 1941, the American Humanist Association was founded and pushed for people to lead moral lives without a reliance on religious doctrine. Atheist organizations like the American Atheist Association, the Advancement for Atheism, the American Association for the Advancement of Atheism was founded in 1925, American Atheists in 1963. They tended to be more interested in keeping religion explicitly out of government and the education system. And the Freedom from Religion Foundation, also known as FFRF, was founded in 1978 to promote the constitutional principle of separation of church and state, and to educate the public on matters retaining to non-theism. By the 21st century, as I said before, the new atheists like Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris had emerged to reinforce how religion can sometimes be anti-science and anti-rational thought. So there's a variety of people working for the cause of separation for various reasons, either because they're anti-religion or because they just believe it's the right thing to do. Over the past 4 decades, since Roe versus Wade, the religious culture wars have been fought over evangelizing prayer in schools, state laws on abortion and reproductive rights, the Blaine Amendment, which has to do with the direct support of religious institutions by government funds. So if the government is giving vouchers to religious schools, etc. And the Supreme Court rulings on LGBTQIA+ folks. These culture wars seem never ending. And it's become increasingly evident that the strategy of counterattack might not be the best one. In creating this talk, I did a lot of research, and I will confess, I sort of idolize the American atheists who took out billboards during the holiday season, gently but snarkily reminding the world that there was more than one religion in the world. They provoked a pretty massive backlash against them and against atheism. Likewise, you may have heard of the Satanic Temple, which is not at all what it sounds like if you haven't heard of it. What they are is a group of skeptics who are the ultimate questioners of authority, and they've been fighting tooth and nail to keep religion out of the government. One classic example is in towns where or states or towns where the government has decided to put up the 10 Commandments, the Satanists filed suit or applied to put up their Baphomet statue. On the one level, the irony and the hypocrisy is really wonderful. But on the other, putting up a demonic-looking statue in the middle of the town hall is not necessarily the way to find common ground with the Christians in your community. Most of the Satanic Temple's public displays, most of which were far more innocuous than Baphomet, have been vandalized. So the question is, what really are we accomplishing when we counterpunch? If we truly believe in justice, equity, pluralism, interdependence, we must fight not to attack the viewpoints of religion, but to defend the principles of secularism. And there's a distinction there that we as Unitarian Universalists are uniquely qualified to stand in. We must defend the viewpoint that even a Christian nationalist, as a viewpoint, has validity, while attempting to stay in the dialogue with those same people. Without this dialogue, there can be no free and responsible search for truth and meaning, which is baked into our church. So the question is, do we believe that that free and responsible search for truth extends to the world? Can we stay in dialogue with people who say trans folks are lesser, or my child should not have to go to school with your child? Can we have that dialogue? And I would submit to you, that is the challenge that secularism has been dealing with for decades, for hundreds of years. We have lessons to learn from them. I would submit that when we find out that the 10 Commandments are going to be erected at our schools, as they have been just recently in Louisiana, we should push for the 10 Commandments of secular thought. What might you say might those include? I've drafted them. Those of you raised Roman Catholic as I am may have recognized the influence. Whether you believe in the Lord your God or not does not mean that no other viewpoint shall come before you. All views must be heard for any views to be valued. That doesn't mean that all views are equally valid, just that you must defend anyone's right to say that you are wrong. Second commandment, thou shalt neither denigrate the image of another's belief, nor raise up any false image of a one God that founded this nation. Throughout human history, we've had rulers by divine right. In this country, it is the consent of the governed that is divine. Thou shalt not take thy opponent's name in vain. No ad hominem attacks. Generalizing, demonizing, or cherry picking from their views is not okay. Context is critical. Remember, your Sabbath day is not my Sabbath day. Your holy day is not mine, and between all of us, every day can and should be holy. Honor not only your father and mother, but also all of the ancestors and all of the history that we share. We have all come to this place through the path of our shared history. Thou shalt agree that no moral or legal code that does not have life, human or otherwise, as its beginning and ending, can be considered ethical. And while we may disagree over where life begins or what happens after its end, life must rise above all else as one shared sacred value. Thou shalt not give thy word falsely or present hypocrisy as morality. Adultery is only one way that we can destroy the relationships that bind and sustain us all. Understand that conversely, you can speak for what you believe, but you can't tell me what I believe. Thou shalt honor the rights of others as if they were your own, and know that all justice, all equity, and the roots of compassion are predicted from this stance, and it is only by honoring these rights that we invest our rights with value. I say that again. It's only by honoring the rights of others that we value our own. And lastly, go right on ahead coveting. Because no human is free of coveting, of wanting, of needing. To be human is to want better than we have. Whether you believe that we came out of the trees as evolved animals or out of the garden as favored creations, we all want something more. The key is knowing that the only way to get it is to work together. As Unitarian Universalists, we believe that every person has inherent worth. So every person does have an inherent right to state their views and attempt to influence the consensus that represents our nation, but not to impose those views on others. What we can learn from the secular movement is that in the end, we're all in this foxhole together. And I'll explain that. There is an anti-atheist trope, cliche, that there, quote unquote, are no atheists in a foxhole. Well, I can tell you from the words of my dear friend Peter, who founded the Atheist Association in Plainfield and was himself a Marine who served on Iwo Jima. He said, as an atheist, I know at least one. But I would go further than that, because Peter taught me a lot. I would say that if an atheist, a Unitarian Universalist, a Christian fundamentalist, and I forgot my fourth one, dove into a foxhole, secularists would come out. We would come to understand that all of those viewpoints are equally valuable, and we live or die, we survive or thrive, we fail or we succeed together. It is only by separating religion from the thou shalts of government that we have a chance to have that conversation. And as Unitarian Universalists, we don't have commandments, but we do have a certain expertise. We do have a history of creating a space where all viewpoints can meet in safety. We do have a value that says, I will defend to the death your right to say it, even if I disagree with you. We are the people most aptly suited to follow up what Martin Luther King said in his dream speech. And I've lost my quote, but I'm going to fake it. He said, we must conduct ourselves in this struggle as if they were not our enemy, but are those who would someday be our friend. So, as I look at our Supreme Court, or the New York Times, or MSNBC, or Fox News, and I ask myself, wouldn't this be a great country if religion would just stop? And then I think, no, it wouldn't. It truly wouldn't. And that's the atheist in me speaking. As a Unitarian Universalist, I say, wouldn't it be a great country if we could just talk to each other, just listen to each other, and get to a point where we realize, while we may not agree on the why and the where and the how, we all agree on one thing. We have to eventually agree. Thank you.